Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical strategies of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, Meredith Oke, QBC co-founder and executive coach, with a friendly reminder: podcasts are conversations, not consultations. Though if you're looking for a practitioner, check out our directory at www.quantumbiologycollective.org. Sarah Turner has a postgraduate degree in clinical neuroscience and started her career working as a researcher for a major pharmaceutical company. But, as she explains in this episode, her findings led her to more deeply explore the role of quantum physics in biology. Over years of research and interviewing luminaries in this emerging field, Sarah is tying all her experience together with a unique photobiomodulation, that's red light therapy, product that targets the gut-brain axis. Sarah is also the host of the Rebel Scientist podcast. We have a long and interesting conversation. Enjoy. Hello, Sarah Turner. Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Meredith. It's lovely to be here.
All right. And Sarah is the host of the Rebel Scientist podcast, which is a fabulous podcast. I highly recommend. It goes very well in this quantum ecosystem. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and how you came into this weird and wonderful area of science and health.
Yeah, so actually I started off in fairly orthodox science. So I start the first part of my career in pharmaceuticals. So I worked at Hoffmann La Roche, and I also worked at Merck's. I worked at GlaxoSmithKline as a research scientist. So I was mainly in the latter part of that half of my career, I was looking at drug deposition in the lungs. Which was very interesting. And I got to be on what they call a task force, like someone who's in the industry, like looking for problems and resolving them. And one of the problems was actually that the asthma inhalers were not working correctly for some people, and they wanted to find out why. And I was a member of this big task force, and we actually found out it was due to electrostatic buildup in the body. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, that was a very interesting time. But we kind of had... we resolved that issue, and then we were looking at, okay, how can you resolve electrostatic in the body? And that's kind of what got me at least interested in how, a lot of what's going on is to do with what's going on internally rather than externally. Even something that you wouldn't expect, like the delivery of a drug.
Right.
How you are internally will totally change your response to certain drugs. So that that got me down a certain road, and
what a cool rabbit hole. Could you explain a little more about that, like what you mean by electrostatic buildup in the body, and then why that was affecting a person's asthma medication?
Sure. So when you use certain inhalers, I'm talking about that. There's some with a disc, and it's plastic, and it's two pieces of foil that you open them up and you inhale the drug.
Okay, so not the kind that's like a tube where you put a metal canister inside and then pump it?
Potentially those ones, but they weren't the ones I was testing. But potentially. Anything where you've got like a layer of plastic. So you've got a layer of plastic against like maybe some metal container where you can potentially have a charge build up because, you've got an insulator surrounding the metal.
Okay.
And so they had me, we were doing tests, and when they're testing these drugs, they have substitute lungs. So basically it's a metal sieve where you would put the drug into the sieve, and then you analyze exactly the deposition into various parts of the sieve, which represents the lung. And if you have a static charge buildup when you're handling these devices, so for example, they had me wearing rubber boots and kind of shuffling around to build up a static charge in my body, then discharging the canister and seeing where the drug deposits. You have a different profile to if you're grounded. So, for example, if I've got a grounding wire on, I'm attached to, the electric output. I have like a lab coat with metal seams to allow any charge to dissipate from my body. Then you have a different deposition profile. And actually, when you're looking at things like these drugs, you need to get it into a certain layer of your lung, because you're looking at what they call fine particle deposition. So how far down in the lung the drug is going to get makes a massive impact on the therapeutic effect.
Okay.
And the interesting thing was, really, a lot of these problems could be solved by just grounding. A lot of problems that people have where they've got a strange deposition profile in their lungs of these drugs could be resolved by grounding the person rather than changing the plastic in the device, which is, of course, the workaround for the drug
upping
company.
the dosage or whatever else people start messing around with.
Exactly. And so for me, kind of like, oh, I see, really this is a very simple problem that could be resolved by just changing the environment of the person. And we're not really educated in that, something simple like how, and this is not just drugs, this is also deposition of particles outside. This is how we're relating to our environment depends on, how are our bodies doing physiologically? And if you are indoors all day, kind of shuffling around on your carpet, not getting outside, not doing the grounding, your body is responding very differently to those environmental particles, not only, if you are then taking medication, how your body's responding to that medication. So to me, it's like, I see how you could probably help a lot of people with asthma straight away, without having to up the dose.
That to me is like huge.
Yeah. It's huge, but it's obviously not something that the drug companies want to hear, because that's not their business. Their business is making the drug. And I'm not big pharma bashing, but that just is their business.
Yes.
So I left.
So just out of curiosity, how did they reconcile this finding? Like, did they recommend to people ways to be grounded just to improve the efficacy of their product, or did they?
Well, no, because like I say, they're a company that's their business is making the drug. So they changed the plastics on inhalers so that you didn't get the buildup of the charge. That's kind of problem solved from their end. I did,
so they solved the problem, but they just didn't do it in a way that actually explained it to people. They just fixed their product. Okay.
Yeah, which is what they do. Like I say, they're kind of not in the industry of wellness communication, I suppose.
Yes.
They're in the industry.
No, for sure. If there is a solution on the product end, I could totally see why they would choose that one. But I also understand how this research led you down a quantum rabbit hole. It
led me down a rabbit hole to kind of, so I actually, when I left the drug company, I actually trained to be a nutritionist. Mm-hmm. But again, that didn't go so far, because nutrition I found was actually quite limited too. Yeah. So then I kind of looked at neuroscience. So it kind of set me, it set me down looking at various things to do with a more holistic approach to health.
And what did you find when you studied neuroscience? Like, sort of where did that lead?
Well, the neuroscience piece, again, that was very interesting, because I became more and more convinced that, that it's how you're thinking about things that's having the biggest impact on your health. And so, but the neuroscience masters, obviously it's more about the structure of the brain and how things are working in the brain. And it kind of gives you an idea of things a while ago now. And I certainly wasn't told any of the quantum biology stuff that, we've been talking about and that you share on your collective. But there were certain things there to do with like immunity in the brain. How does the immune system impact the brain? How does the endocannabinoid system, for example, segue with the brain and the peripheral nervous system? So I learned a lot there, again, about a more holistic approach to health that includes all of the different body systems and how that specifically relates to what's going on in the brain.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So your background, what did you study originally that led you into the pharma job? That was
biology, actually.
Biology. Okay. Yeah. So biology, then nutrition. That's just quite a stack that you've got. I love it. So biology, then nutrition, then neuroscience.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So then when did the light piece come into your work?
So
or how?
Yeah, it did. So after I'd done the nutrition, I actually moved to California, and I was working for a company we were doing some very kind of far out research looking at quantum consciousness interface devices, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's really looking at how your intention can potentially affect things like a random event generator in a computer system. So I was working
Wow.
for a company looking at potentially how could you affect a random event generator in a computer, and could you use that as some kind of diagnostic? And then after you've looked at that as a diagnostic, could you then make remedies based on that pure information on
Wow.
medicine?
Okay. I have more questions. Okay. So I understand the intention and how you could measure how that would affect a random event generator to see if a person's holding an intention could have an effect in the material world. Explain a little more about using it as a diagnostic tool.
Well, this was a guy called Peter Fraser who had invented this way of representing the body as information structures in space, and then putting those inside a computer system, each of which kind of has a weighted measure against your ability to skew randomness. So again, like I say, it was a fairly out there concept, but it was quite interesting, and it led me to a lot of very interesting people in the field who were doing these experiments looking at intentional fields and the ability of consciousness to affect our external environment. And I was there for quite a long time. And during that time, I was involved in the making of a few movies.
Which
along
ones?
with one called The Living Matrix.
Okay.
One called Supercharged Movie. It was myself and my... at the time, Harry Massey was the guy who was looking at these devices that were a diagnostic and then a solution. And then we also made a film together called Supercharged Movie, which was about how, obviously, charge, what's the effect of charge in the body. And we got to interview some really cool people like Jerry Pollock, Luc Montagnier, Mei-Wan Ho.
Oh, wow. All the greats.
Yeah, all the greats. So, So the one before The Living Matrix was more about James Oshman's... His idea was that the fascia was the living matrix, like a semiconducting crystalline structure in the body. I think now that's a little bit been superseded by more of the Pollock's work about how, it needs to be a hydrated collagen network in the body. But at the time...
It's like there's the Oshman and the Pollock work has kind of come together. To form a next level. Okay.
That's right. So that's kind of the next level. But at the time, I mean, I'm probably talking 20 years ago, maybe at least 15 years, the whole concept of the living matrix was fairly new. And, people like Lynn McTaggart and The Field, Greg Braden, all of those guys.
Oh, I love this. I was reading all their stuff this whole time. I've probably seen that movie. For people who'd like to watch it, where is it available? Where are these films available right now?
I'm sure they're on Gaia. I'm sure they're on Gaia.
Yeah,
the Supercharged movies on Amazon, but people can probably find it with an internet search.
That's so cool. I didn't realize that you had interviewed all of these people who are quite foundational to this idea of our quantum existence.
I did. I really had access quite early on to a lot of these people, and people who are unfortunately no longer around. I was very lucky to spend time with Mei-Wan Ho at her home. Yeah, well, she lived in North London, kind of near me. Yeah. So I got to interview her. People like Fritz Albert Pop.
What was Mei-Wan Ho like?
Fabulous. Yeah, really fabulous, fabulous lady. It was difficult to get her to come down. She was very much, absorbed in her work.
Yes.
So it was a bit like Jack Cruz. You really had to concentrate hard and kind of take your notes and do your homework. But a really, really fabulous lady. And she was also a great artist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So she had a studio out the back and she would kind of do her art there. And But I mean, her books are great. If people haven't read her books, I mean, actually, I've just come to my friend's house and I've got a little stack of books in. I've just seen that I've got Living Rainbow H2O down there that I intend to read.
Oh, lovely. Do you want to hold it up for people?
Yeah, sure.
People who want to track it down. Wonderful. Okay, so we've been talking about some of the thinkers and the researchers who really laid the foundation for what we are now calling applied quantum biology. So there's Gilbert Ling is one of the first, and then there's, you mentioned Pollock and Mei-Wan Ho and Oshman and Becker. So while we're here talking about those people, could you sort of explain how you see it Well, I'll see how I say it. How I see it is that each of these people made a huge contribution to totally changing how we understand, to bringing us into a quantum paradigm. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't a framework necessarily to unite all of this new information. Yes. And to me, it was like Keeley and McFadden, when they figured out the mechanism of quantum processes in living systems with their book, The Coming Age of Life on the Edge, The Coming Age of Quantum Biology. And then to me, my take sort of, and I'd love to hear yours, is that it was probably Dr. Kruse who then took that step and applied it to like human health. And what does it mean for our bodies and on a practical level? Because for the most part, these people don't actually break down their work into, okay, here's what you should be doing practically on a day-to-day basis. And that's what the Quantum Biology Collective is trying to looks at is like, okay, so we have all of this amazing research and information, but what does that mean? Like, what should I, for my health, and what choices I need to be making?
Yeah, and I think that's partly due to a lot of these researchers were not doctors or clinicians. You know, a lot of the researchers that we're talking about were academics or physicists even. You know, so for, you know, a physicist like Jim Al-Khalili is not going to kind of really say anything about what's going on in the body because it's just not his place. And obviously he's tied to a university and he can't go saying things that he can't back up. And so I think, Dr. Jack Kruse was hugely important in bringing it down to how people could actually implement in their lives, because he's he is a medical doctor. And so, he can make that bridge, because I think it's rare to, have all of those skills together, because you really have to have that understanding of physics, and it's mainly physicists that have it, and so they're not then making that leap to apply it to biology. So this whole thing of biophysics, it is fairly new. And someone like Dr. Mei Wan Ho, she was definitely making those connections, and she actually wrote some great books, not just this one I held up, but she wrote books on AIDS, on viruses, on societies and how they could be sustainable. But it wasn't so consumable because it was fairly high level. Yes. And a lot of it was controversial. A lot of her stuff on AIDS was very controversial. But Dr. Jack Kruse, I think, definitely came at the right time where people needed to be able to relate it to what they were actually doing. So I actually credit him for a lot of my learning and interest and wanting to really study this in more detail and apply it, to something practical. Because certainly he was saying things that other people weren't saying and making connections between all of these disparate theories.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And what I find is that people who study his work to do different things with it. So we have, like on our faculty at the certification, it's the two qualifiers are that you've studied, but also that you work with patients, with humans on a day-to-day basis. Because as you said, a lot of these people are academics. So it's one thing to have a theory that this is how it works, or you could win the Nobel Prize in circadian rhythms, but what does it actually mean to get up with the sun every day and live on that system? So, and then other people like yourself have started to develop products to enhance our health based on your understanding of how light works. So tell us the next step. So we've gone through the biology, the pharmaceuticals, the nutrition, the neuroscience, the quantum work, which is super interesting. We probably do a whole podcast just on that. But you came out of that and decided to focus on light. Explain how you got to there, and then how you got to CeraThrive.
So initially, when I was making these, certainly the last movie, I was very much interested in water science, actually. And I was looking at with a business partner, maybe making a structured water product, because the structured water thing was so interesting. I'd gone to Pollock's lab. We were looking at how we could maybe implement some of those learnings. But of course, my background then was neuroscience, and I'm thinking, well, the brain is water, so if we can have this effect on structured water, can we not have this effect on the brain? And so I started looking at photobiomodulation, which is just the fancy name for light therapies, or using light on the body. And I realized that there was actually already a whole ton of research that was going on in that field of using photobiomodulation specifically for a brain application. Not so much, the water piece, but certainly it was there. And so my next step really was to see if I could get involved in some of that research. And to your point, I wanted to go somewhere to actually see if it worked on real people.
Right.
So my next step from there was to get in contact with Dr. Marvin Berman, who's at the Quiet Mind Foundation in Philadelphia, who was studying transcranial photobiomodulation, and ask if I could do some of the data collection on a big study that he was doing. Because my background is research, and it's something that I could go and offer to help and do the data collection, help out with some of the analysis. So I went over to Philadelphia and was involved in a study looking at near-infrared light for Parkinson's disease. So it was a study that was going on under the direction of Baylor Scott and White, Jason Huang, who was there at Texas University. And it was really very interesting. I did 3 months data collection of a double-blind placebo-controlled trial where we had sham helmets and real helmets, and we were doing gait analysis, we were doing reaction times, we were doing some blood biomarkers. And it became very apparent at the end of the 3 months who was getting the sham and who was getting the active, because people were changing. And when I say they were like reversing their symptoms, it wasn't always that they were actually getting better. Sometimes these people were struggling because all of a sudden they were able to do things that they weren't able to do previously, and it was a shock to them. People had built up their kind of coping mechanisms with Parkinson's, and to have that taken away, all of a sudden they can dress themselves, all of a sudden they can do their own clothes, all of a sudden they can get themselves to the car. It was kind of an eye-opener because there was a bit of resistance there, but certainly people were changing. And so I thought, okay, this definitely is something very real, that just by having this helmet on, where it was, that particular study was using 1065 nanometer wavelength, so long wave near infrared light only. And they were doing it 3 times a week.
That's it, just 3 times a week.
They got a statistically significant effect on almost all the measurements that they did.
Wow.
Which is a fairly, it's a very intransient, difficult to treat illness, Parkinson's disease. There's that we don't have a pharmaceutical intervention at this time that really is effective.
Yeah.
And so from then I thought, okay, this is something that I'd like to kind of really investigate. And that's really where I've gone from then. The helmet that was used at the time was a really big helmet. It had tons of fans to try and keep it cool. It was really heavy. And I was like, well, I would like to use this and do some brain coaching, but I'd like it to be smaller and easier and kind of friendlier. And so I went to a few companies with the aim to develop a device like that. And which is really how I've got to CeraThrive, because then I went to a group in the Netherlands, the Lighttree Ventures, who I'm partnered with now. And they said, yeah, okay, we can make that device with the caveat that you kind of, if we make it, then we'd like you to kind of front that company and get it out to people, because if it's needed, then we can do it. And so that's where I'm at. So we made this device, which is a lot smaller, a lot easier to use. It's battery operated. Right. You're not kind of connected to a plug, but it's the same power output, more or less. So that was the goal. But I mean, I'm making it sound contrite, like, oh, this, and this. But, there's quite a few years in between that, looking at other things and developing stuff and going to work for different companies. But yeah, that was kind of loosely how it went from doing that study with the Quiet Mind Foundation to kind of having a device that enables people to have access to that technology, but at home, easily, simply, and practically very easier.
That's so cool. So the device sort of wraps around the head, and then there's a light, the red light is pressed up against the skull. Is that?
Yeah. I've got one here, Meredith.
Yeah, let's see it.
This is the finished design that we've come up with, and I'll put the lights on so you can see. So you can see.
Cool.
This is,
yeah.
And then also we have one for the back because, there is some evidence, you can kind of get to the cerebellum there, which of course controls motor function. So, there is some value for this. Although my main reason for having it in this design where it is kind of like something that goes across the forehead is that hair is a barrier to light. And hair, it's quite difficult to get light through hair. It's difficult to get light onto the brain anyway.
Yes.
There's quite a few barriers with the cranium, and there's a lot else going on kind of on your head to get light. And certainly it's probably only about between 2 and 3% of the light that you shine that actually gets onto the surface of the brain anyway.
Okay.
Even
when it's pressed up against the skull, or just is that more with the okay.
Well, especially when it's pressed up against the skull. If you've not got it pressed up, it's probably even less.
Okay.
Than that. It's a small amount of light that actually penetrates through and gets onto the surface of the brain. However, it is enough to have a therapeutic effect. It seems that the brain doesn't need to have a lot of light to kind of initiate that healing effect.
Okay. So how did you decide what frequencies and intensity the light should be? Was it based on the research you did in Philadelphia, or? It was
certainly, I became convinced of this longer wave light. But in my device, I'm kind of aiming for a multitude of targets because our bodies are covered in light receptors.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of light receivers in the body. There's light receivers in the blood. There's light receivers in the mitochondria. There's light receivers in a lot of areas of the body. So my goal was to maximize the chances of a therapeutic effect by targeting multiple light receivers. So I have 4 wavelengths of light in this device.
Okay.
So the red light obviously is getting the blood because red light will penetrate even more superficially than a near infrared. But the red light will target the skin and the light receivers in the blood, and certainly in the skin around the head, where all of that blood is going to get into the head sooner or later.
Right.
And then the longer the wavelength of light, the deeper it would penetrate into the body generally. So like the 850 wavelength, because it's a longer wave, that will penetrate more deeply into the body generally. And we believe that's received by the mitochondria, by a specific enzyme, cytochrome C oxidase. Although that's not the only theory of how this light is being received. It's certainly the main theory right now is that cytochrome C oxidase is the main receiver of that 850 light. And then the longer wavelengths, they do have absorption peaks for cytochrome C oxidase, but also I'm thinking that water is possibly one of the major chromophores here. And this is where the kind of theory that, maybe the structured water is having a therapeutic effect at these longer wavelengths. So I'm targeting the blood, I'm targeting the mitochondria, I'm also targeting the water. And by using 4 distinct wavelengths, you are maximizing your chance of hitting a chromophore that's going to have a therapeutic effect.
Right.
I also, with this device I'm making, I've also got a pad that goes across the gut because the gut is a great target for photobiomodulation. It's a nice open area. You can usually access it well. You can hit a lot of blood. You can hit a lot of chromophores. You can hit free-floating mitochondria, which we know can now travel around the body and, do their good work where it's needed. And the gut and the brain connection is also so important.
Yeah.
Well, not only for chronic disease, which they're now finding, more and more connections, but also just for general wellness, to have this good communication between the gut and the brain. Yes. And I wonder how the study with the Parkinson's guys would have gone if we'd have had a gut piece, because especially for Parkinson's, there's a huge gut component there. So I wonder if I can reach. So I also use a gut piece when I'm doing
nice.
With the headband.
Okay.
I think this kind of helps to irradiate the body with a lot of light. And then with the band, you can target all of those different chromophores in the brain. And you can also do some modulation by pulsing the frequencies, which is kind of it's a slightly different therapy, actually, brain entrainment or pulsing. but you're stacking your hacks, if you like. You're kind of
Right.
doing a lot with one. You're doing a lot with one
thing.
system. Yeah.
So that's all one thing. So you put it across your forehead, you put the other one on the back of your head, and then you put one on across the gut.
Across the gut, yeah.
Okay. So just yesterday, I was I'm here in New Hampshire. I was on the beach by the lake, catching up with someone who I haven't seen since last summer. And her father has Parkinson's. And it's early days. And last summer, they wanted him to go on medication and he was resistant. And he has since gone on it. But now he needs, anti-anxiety medication to counteract the Parkinson's medication. So how would you explain to someone like that who's got a family member who's suffering, and the only clear path is to go to the doctor and get medication? How maybe we could workshop it, but like, how would you explain to that person, like, this device can actually really help your dad?
Well, first of all,
it's quite a bridge, and I want to figure out how to cross it, because it could just help so many people.
It's quite a bridge. And I will just put a little disclaimer in that I'm not a medical doctor, and that I technically would never advise anyone on a brain disease. And actually, with regards to all of these red light systems for a brain application, nobody has got an FDA approval yet for a brain health application. Even the device where I told you that they're getting the studies, they're now building up the research, they're building up those clinical studies in order to present that, to possibly get the FDA to approve a brain health application. But at the moment, it's not granted to anyone. So nobody in this industry can actually say this red light therapy device could potentially cure, treat, diagnose, suppress anything. Right. Any kind of neurodegeneration.
Okay, so you're technically not allowed to say that it might help with his Parkinson's.
No.
But if I'm just chatting with a friend on the beach.
Yes. If you were.
So I understand that. That's a really important point to make. We don't want to cross any legal boundaries here. But so, for example, like, I think it would be quite a natural thing for someone to say, oh, I heard that following such and such a food regimen has been shown to be helpful in this situation. People like, oh yeah, maybe, like, people would have an idea that maybe doing some stuff to your diet could help with an illness, no matter what it is. Like, that's mostly accepted. I think there's still people who don't think so, but that's kind of a normal thing to say. But when it comes to light, people are just like, what are you talking, right? Like, what are you talking about? So even just in a casual, like, to support your, to support what's going on, like, it might, might be helpful.
My aim is always to get people to kind of think about our human evolution, and that we have really only recently had artificial light. And before that, we were very much linked to the sun, and the phases of the sun, and that we are diurnal mammals. That means we're mammals that are meant to be out in daytime. And we're really, up until the dawn of artificial light, we got up with the sun, because that's when things became light. So our bodies are covered in light receivers, because that's really how we respond. We respond to the sun rising. That's it. That's the time for us to get up and start our day. In the middle of the day, we have certain frequencies of light that encourage our bodies for certain behaviors, working, foraging, mating. And then as the sun goes down, our bodies are getting ready for bed. And when it's dark, up until recently, that was it. It'd be dark. You'd have to go to bed. There'd be nothing you could do.
There'd be nothing to do.
So really, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that our bodies are so responsive to light, and that light is so crucial for our health. And so I think if you can get people to understand, we've evolved under natural light. We're meant to be exposed to certain light frequencies at certain times of the day. We have times for healing and repair. And those long waves of light, when the sun is at certain points on the horizon, you get those long wavelengths of red light. Very important for the body. And if you're not getting them, and if you haven't got them for a while, then potentially, you're going to have problems with the body. So then people maybe get the idea, okay, this is not such an alien thing to use light for healing. It's actually a very natural thing. And the sun contains all frequencies of light. These ones that we've got in these devices are sort of mimicking that sunset frequency of light, because they're in the long range, they're in the red and the near infrared range. I think once people can get their head around the fact that, it does make sense that our bodies should respond to light, then it's a little bit more of an easier sell to say, okay, well, this is a way to substitute those healing frequencies. It's very simple. It's not anything that you wouldn't be exposed to if you were outside in the sun. It's just healing frequencies of light. And like I say, these devices, we've kind of shielded them all. So there's no other kind of strange EMFs you're getting. You're just getting the healing light frequencies. Yeah. And it's simple, it's non-toxic, it's non-invasive. So you're not going to be kind of doing anything that can potentially have a side effect, like taking a drug.
Yes.
And for most people, it's just like, well, why not give it a try? It's something natural. It's something you can do. And actually, if you look at the data, people are having profound effects for these kind of neurodegenerative conditions. And for most people, it's so scary to have a diagnosis like that doing something like this, which is fairly easy. I mean, you're just sitting still for 10 minutes with a light on you. It's a fairly easy thing to do. And why not? Why not give yourself the most chances that you can to heal from these conditions? I mean, obviously, with groups like yourself, where you can teach people other things that they can do around it, such simple things like we were talking, grounding, seeing sunrise, drinking good water, eating good food, integrating some of this technology, people can make profound shifts.
Yes.
And I think the sell is just to get people to understand, we really are just animals that have kind of taken ourselves out of our environment. The more we can kind of put ourselves back there in that natural environment, potentially the more benefit we can get from it. And I think most people can get on board with that once they get that.
Once you make that shift, it starts to make a little more sense.
Yes. It's difficult for the brain thing, because I think people can't understand how you could get light inside your skull.
Right.
Most people think, okay, well, and lots of people, even doctors, have said that to me. Well, it's very dark in there. But it's not at all. In fact, I went to a lecture recently, I think it was A4M, and they were saying, well, of course, it's very dark inside the skull. And I was thinking, well, it's not at all. For a start, you're getting the light in through all the gaps in your skull. The skull is quite transparent to near infrared light. Also, you have biophotonic emission happening in the brain. Right. Possibly that's one of the big forms of communication in the brain. Yes. So it's a misconception, but I think that's why it's a bit of a difficult for people to get their head around.
Right.
But
that's true. We have this idea the skull is like a helmet and inside is all dark, but in fact, there's light coming through and light coming out because we create our own light.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, so good. Okay. So how do you recommend to somebody to use the TheraThrive device? Does it depend sort of if they're using it just for general wellness, or if they have quite an advanced condition?
Yeah, it does.
How should we think about this?
It does depend on what somebody's health goals are, and it also depends on where they're at on their health journey, because the kind of more dysfunctional your mitochondria are, the less light you need to have an effect. And there is something called the biphasic dose response, where you need to kind of hit a sweet spot with light. So if you are very, very depleted, you may only need a little bit of light to kind of get your mitochondria going. We don't want them to be going so fast that they're producing so many waste products, that your body can't cope with that. So I do a little bit of brain coaching, and certainly for these first devices, I'm going to be doing brain coaching to make sure that I've got the protocols correct for what I'm putting out for a consumer product. But for most people who are of average health, to use a red light device like 3 or 4 times a week, depending on what you're trying to do. Like I say, the good thing about these kinds of devices is that you can pulse the light to have an additional effect. So, for example, we now know that 40 hertz is very good to help you kind of get into the zone and to focus and concentrate. So I I'm like hectic setting up this company, and sometimes you just need to get something done. I will use the 40 hertz pulsing cycle and the gut panel to kind of give my body the energy, but also to help my brain get into a certain state. And I will pair that with a task where I'm concentrating, because there's a lot of evidence of neuroplasticity of pairing a task with brain stimulation. The same with meditation. If you want to get into a meditative state, there's evidence now that 100 hertz is really helpful for that. And most of the studies actually being done on ultrasound, but I actually went to a lecture where I asked the ultrasound guy, do you think this would work with pulsing photonic light? And so he's going to do a study, hopefully. But also he's like, yeah, why not? I think it would, because, it's basically getting the brain to entrain. So now I do that when I'm meditating. I use this 100 hertz pulsing schedule. Again,
so could you set the pulsing schedule on the device?
Yeah, so it's got an app. So you set it, you choose from 6 different functions, which I've, for now, I've kind of put in the pulsing there. So if it says meditate, that's 100 hertz. So you might set it for meditate. So it is Bluetooth, but it's got a Bluetooth disable switch on the top. So you set it with Bluetooth, and then you can turn all the Bluetooth off, so you're not getting any of that. So yes, there are 6 different programs, whether you want to chill, whether you want to sleep, whether you want to meditate, whether you want to focus. And then there's 2 programs, which is just getting just full on red light, which is just kind of like the healing, the maximum healing and repair kind of function. So it really depends what you're trying to do, because I've been at a lot of the biohackers, and of course the biohackers are all looking for something specific. They want to meditate more, they want to focus more, they want to kind of up their game with performance. Yeah. And then you've got the other group who are in, who are in a category where they're unwell. And if you're going from a baseline to better, you might just want to focus on your health, and then you just want to do it regularly. Yeah. But for all of these different light products, it's kind of a cumulative effect. It's almost like exercising. If you exercise, your body will respond by making more muscle, and that builds up over time. The same with light. If you shine light onto the body, it will respond by making more mitochondria, making more light receivers, and then your health and whatever else you're trying to do will increase over time. So for almost all of these devices, the best thing to do is consistency, do it. Yeah. Do it. If you want to give it a good try, do it 3 or 4 times a week for 3 months, and then kind of assess. It's not something where you can, just do one session and then. Yes. And this is a theme that has been coming up on many of the podcasts I've been doing lately, which is that, using a nature-based approach, using a light-based approach is highly effective, but it is also takes longer than perhaps some other kind of intervention. But the upside is that it's increasing our healthiness in all ways, right? As opposed to a drug, which maybe would work faster, although in some cases there aren't. In a lot of chronic illness cases, there isn't a drug, but say there's often a trade-off with the side effect. Whereas there's no trade-off, right? Like it's just... Yeah, that's the brilliant thing. There's no side effect, right? Like if we're wrong, oh well, but it's not like, oh, sorry, you now are going to have seizures. Right? Exactly. That's exactly right. You're kind of upping your general health at the same time as remedying perhaps a symptom. Something like pain relief, they've now tested, these red light therapy devices for pain, and they found, over the long term, they're just as good as opiates, but without the side effects, and potentially you're preventing yourself from getting these neurodegenerative conditions at the same time. But yes, it is not an instant effect. So it's something. And again, and I was saying this on the last podcast, we discussed this. So you're also like, another benefit is that we are sort of training ourselves to have some mental fortitude and patience and discipline, and take, even if we're doing it because we have no other choice, to take that slow, steady road of building back our health by doing things that are going to have an overall positive effect and cure the condition, or I won't say cure, and help alleviate the pain that we're in from our symptoms. For sure. It definitely takes a little bit of perseverance and a bit of dedication, which is why I've made these devices to kind of be as easy as possible.
Yes.
Like this device is designed to be strapped around, but I quite often, I'm in my yoga outfit, just stick it down the front of my yoga shorts while I'm doing something, put the headband on, and then you know that you've done it for the day. Just cut out the things that kind of make it difficult. If you've got to plug something in, then you've got to sit in a certain corner for the day. All these little things where there are potential blocks, because you're right, it comes down to consistency and routine. And the more we can have simple hacks, routines for going outside every morning and looking at the sunrise or standing on the grass or doing these things, the more consistently we will do it. But when you start seeing results, then it becomes easier.
Yes, it's true. That is the great motivator. And even if you've been in the down in the trenches of a symptoms that haven't budged, even a small improvement feels really exciting.
Yes, that's right.
For me, it was chronic fatigue. So I was like, oh, I just got through the day without lying down on the floor. Which I would used to have to do periodically, just let my body get some energy until I felt like I had enough energy to get up again.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and now, I can have a normal day and not think about it, but it takes time.
It takes time and things like that, having some way of monitoring how you're doing. I know everybody in the biohacker world has an Aura ring, and I wear an Aura ring. But there are lots of ways, like you say, to kind of monitor what you're doing. Someone sent me recently, I've just got to unpack it and get on it, just a little thing that does your reaction times that you can set up to do a couple of minutes a day, which is totally linked to how your brain is performing. So that's something I might integrate into brain coaching, because sometimes, especially if you haven't got symptoms, you want to know that it's doing something. So for me, it's been great to see my HRV scores going up. It's great to see the sleep scores improving. Certainly with red light, there have been some really interesting studies on glymphatic drainage. So this is how your brain flushes. And if you look at the Aura ring, you can kind of see when people have been doing red light for a while that you have going in and out of deep sleep more often. And I was speaking to Dr. Joe DiGiro, and he and I are kind of thinking that's probably the brain flushing, so.
Interesting.
Then, of course, like you say, it gives you a bit of extra motivation to keep going when you can see these improvements. Yeah. Especially if you are looking to prevent illness, you need to.
Yeah. That reaction time one sounds amazing. Cause if you are in good health and you want it and you're looking to improve performance, what metric are you using? Yeah. So that could be a great one. And and it also brings up the idea that if it is a good idea to track in some way how your symptoms are at, ranking them out of 10 or whatever, so you can see, because I find that too, with these gentler approaches, the changes are gentler as well. Yes. So sometimes we don't notice them. So tracking, consistent time, doing it over time. And then would you say there's a time of day, would it be counterproductive to do this at 11 o'clock at night? Would we be putting ourselves out of circadian regulation by putting the light on ourselves?
Well, they are
when
red
it's dark
light.
Out.
They are red light. So, it's not like you're kind of really giving yourself a bright blue light. However, they are bright lights. These devices are fairly high dose. So I recommend to people to use them within the hours of sunrise and sunset.
Well, Sarah, I just want to say that I think it's really a huge contribution that you've made this device. And it's one of those things. I love interviewing people because you hear their unique trajectory, right?
Yeah.
And they have that moment where all the different threads of their life come together to do something really amazing. And I feel like that's what's happening with you in this product. And so thank you for doing it, because I know starting a business is no easy task.
No.
There's 8 million moving parts at any given moment.
That's right. Thank you, Meredith. And it's great. It's great to have the support of people like you and the Quantum Biology Collective, because then you feel like that you're on the right track. I think that's the important thing. Otherwise, you kind of think, is this right? Am I doing the right thing? But then when you have, people like you and all your lovely guests, you can, okay, I can kind of fit this into what other people are saying and it makes sense. So that's hugely supportive.
Good. Wonderful. And no, I'm just so glad you're doing it. And as part of your entrepreneurial journey, you've been going to a lot of conferences and
That's right.
a lot of events. So could you just sort of give us an overview? Like, what are people talking about? What's it like out there? I tend to stay pretty closed in my little community, so I don't always pay attention to the big trends.
Well, it's interesting because in a very short space of time, I've been to the Science of Consciousness Conference, the Health Optimization Summit, and Dave Asprey's Biohacking Conference. And actually, they were very, very different in what people are talking about.
Interesting.
I think, interestingly, for the Science of Consciousness Conference, people are starting to look more at different kinds of physics. Because at the moment, we have this struggle with quantum physics in that you have classical physics and then you have quantum physics, and we don't seem to be able to work out where they meet. There must be a meeting point at somewhere where classical physics turns into quantum physics, but people are struggling to kind of make that connection at the moment. We just say, well, this physics works for the very, very small. Yeah. And this physics works in the real world. Well,
it's just kind of this, And now we've thrown biology in there.
Yeah, and now we've thrown quantum biology in there.
Thanks to Kalili and McFadden. It's like
quantum, And actually, Jim Al-Khalili was talking at the Science of Consciousness event about DNA. But again, he was like, well, this is what we think happens at the, at DNA level. We have this quantum tunneling, but how this, taking that up into the world of proteins and cells and bodies, we can't, it's a jump. Yes. And so the interesting thing there is people are starting to bring in other ways of understanding the world and physics. And certainly people from more the East, like India, are bringing in like in Sanskrit and in more Eastern Indian style philosophies, they have a different way of looking at physics, which is more holistic, maybe. And that was very interesting. I mean, I can't pretend that I understand a lot about it as yet, but it's certainly where I'm putting some of my energy to try and understand how we could maybe understand some of these concepts in a different framework that's not so much kind of like the classical Western physics that's based on mathematics, that's difficult to understand. The physics of the East is more to do with kind of geometry and building up physics from that point. And it gives you maybe an easier way to go from the world of the very, very small up to more macro level. So for me, that was the biggest takeaway from the Science of Consciousness event was, okay, we need to start looking at things in a different way. And they were kind of looking at things like AI, how AI is taken off and will that ever become sentient? And, they, because it is based on this very linear way of looking at physics, perhaps it won't, but perhaps if we could start to look at technology on this different framework, we might get to a different endpoint.
Yes.
So that was very cool. And then I went straight to London. Cool. And London is actually very conservative still, I would say.
Okay.
But a lot of people there were fairly interested in the light therapy, but very much from a symptom-based approach.
Okay.
A lot of cold therapy, interestingly enough, in London, where you would think they'd have enough of that.
Yeah. Living there is cold therapy.
Do you know what? All these people who are into cold, and I do it when I go to, I have a wonderful friend, Christine Whitesell, who does training in Austin, but I sometimes think, come to London and do that in December and see how enthusiastic you are, because it's not the same.
No.
But anyway,
just personally, I cannot, if it's cold out, my body will not tolerate cold therapy. I have to be in the summer or in a warm climate.
Even if the sun was shining and it's cold, it kind of makes a difference. Your environment definitely affects, which of these biohacks I think are more appealing. I mean,
yes.
And the environment. I went to New York last week and I was at a Turkish bath where they have the cold plunge and the sauna and everything. And that was fabulous, but it's kind of a different environment. You're in it and, all these Russian ladies getting you down in there. It's kind of, you kind of need the context.
Yeah. And then you go into the hot one and then you go into the cold one. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah. But so that was interesting that seemed to be a big theme actually in London, was the cold. And I think perhaps it's something that, because a lot of biohackers are used to the cold therapy, but maybe, over in Europe, it's more of a concept that's just coming in.
I see. So there was more of a focus on the cold therapy than the light therapy, would you say, in that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, James Carroll was there with his Thor bed, and he's also very conservative, and rightly so. You know, he really wants to legitimize red light therapy. So he kind of adds a seriousness to red light therapy, which is great. But, you know, it kind of went with the London theme because it is a little bit more conventional and serious. And so that was good. He did a good talk on light therapy, and, you know, he's obviously always trying to get it legitimized and standardized. So that was cool.
Because there's like a ton of research. We had someone send us their file on the photobiomodulation published research, and it's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of
there's over
entries.
3,000. Yeah. Was it Vladimir with his Excel database?
No, it was I forget, the BioLite guy.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah. Mike.
I'm going to murder his second name. Belowski, I think it is.
Yes.
Yes, he's great.
Yeah,
he does
he's
great
got
stuff
a data.
on his
He had a
podcast.
database, and I was just surprised at how much research there was. Because I'd seen bits and pieces, but I hadn't seen it all put together in one place.
Yes.
So that's interesting to me, right? Like there's 3,000 plus published things, and yet you still have people sort of fighting for the legitimacy of it.
Yes. Well, the funding that's available for this kind of therapy compared to the funding that's available for pharmaceuticals is so wildly out of proportion that, you know, that's just where we're at. That's right. And also, you know, the bodies that are regulating these things are also, you know, mainly controlled by the pharmaceutical company. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just where we're at right now.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to take a while to maybe overcome some of those boundaries.
Yeah.
It's just a totally different world regarding the funding.
That's so true. And I mean, and that's why this podcast and what our certification came to be, because it was like all of the research is there. This is clear. Like this isn't guesswork. But it doesn't seem to make a difference in terms of what people were being taught in medical school or naturopathic college or whatever. So it takes people like you, or, you know, like what we're doing is say, okay, like we need ways to implement this right now. We're not going to wait for these institutions to. People
need to take self-responsibility in this time, I think, is the underlying message. Because, you know, there is a lot of stuff out there if you do your own research where you can find amazing research that's being done. It's just not mainstream as yet. But, you know, people finding Quantum Biology Collective, or people, you know, even like Rebel Scientists, we're trying to put out, you can take sovereignty of your own health. It's freely available. Everyone has access to the internet. You can find PubMed. You can kind of, you know, even a very brief research of PubMed, you just have to put in photobiomodulation and whatever you want to search for, and a lot of things will come up. So I think, we're just at that time in history where people have got access to this information, and they really need to use it.
Yeah. And so and then as individuals, we're at that turning point where we need to shift our trust from the institutions into our own sovereign selves and our ability to use our judgment and our discernment to connect with good information that's going to help us and not hurt us.
And become our own experiment. You know, I know that's Jack Cruse's thing, this N equals 1, but it's so true. You know, you need to try these things for yourself and see what works, because that's the ultimate scientist, is that you know, observation and measurement. That's what science is. So, you know, if you're wondering whether you would feel hugely different if you saw the sunrise, well, then do it for a month and track something and see how you feel afterwards. You know, I think people are kind of still in this mode where they're, you know, a little bit, you need to be told something by an authority, but I do think that's sort of phasing out. Maybe, you know, the whole COVID years have taught us you've really got to take your own advice on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that probably opened a lot of minds.
Yeah, I think so.
It opened mine even more. Okay, so I think there was one more conference you were going to tell us about.
Yes, Dave Asprey's conference, which I must admit I had a booth and I was totally snowed in that conference, so I can't profess that I really saw much of what was going on. But certainly, the stacking hacks was the thing. I saw this crazy light bed where it also has PMF. It also had sacred geometry symbols. It also had a grounding pad underneath and some kind of noble gas chamber that you could hold that would create a field around you. So I think, I'm not sure that I saw anything that was hugely new, but I think people are just finding new ways to present these technologies and kind of make them a bit more high tech.
Yeah.
We're just improving on a theme now, I think, is what's going on.
Interesting.
Because, it was a lot of the same companies are there. They're just trying to up their game with their offerings. And obviously that event is where you have kind of the more interesting presentations of what's going on. But it was very cool. It was very well attended. And I said to my friends in New York, I've just been to Dave Asprey. There was thousands of people there. And they're like, well, that's incredible, because for most conferences, the attendance is going down, down, down. But for these biohacking events, they do seem to be very well attended still.
Interesting.
And certainly at my booth, there were people asking all kinds of questions. I mean, we were ram-packed the whole time. We had people on the chairs waiting to try it. We had people queuing up. People are very interested and engaged. So that was cool for that event.
And so who's at the conferences? Like, were these people who were there for their own health? Like, they wanted to learn more in order to help themselves.
Yeah. And a lot of integrative practitioners were there.
Right.
Because I think they're looking for things that they can bring to their patients. Because again, that's a difference between the States and England. Obviously, we don't have that. We don't have medical doctors that are allowed to do anything outside of the NHS so much. There are some private doctors, but it doesn't go over well in a country where everything's free. I'm saying free in brackets, because obviously there's always a cost down the line, but it's people are not into really seeking out private medical care. Yeah. But in the States, you have a lot of integrated functional medicine doctors, complementary doctors, or people that are just therapists that are looking to integrate other things into their clinics. So there was a lot of those kinds of people there, and a lot of people starting biohacking centers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So like you would go and stay there for a few days and...
So no, I think just like a gym, but with red light, with cryo, with IVs.
Wow.
And maybe even some of the wellness centers, normal orthodox gyms that are looking to bring in these wellness things. And especially, even places where it's mainly aesthetics, people are mainly going there for anti-aging. Now people are beginning to realize that actually anti-aging also depends on what you're like inside. If you're ill, you're not going to look great. So I think a lot of these clinics where they focus on anti-aging and longevity are now very much looking at what we would call biohacking, which is now kind of bracketed as anti-aging longevity therapies in some cases. Right. Because, of course, if you want to age well and look good as you age, you also need to be physically well. It's no good just kind of changing the collagen on your face. You also need to, your cells need to be functioning.
Yes, so to have that inner light.
Yeah. So I've spoke to a lot of people who are mainly focused on aesthetics, who are interested in something like the CeraThrive system, because they understand, you don't just want to look pretty on the outside. You have to have a functioning brain to age well. So that was great, speaking to those kinds of people. They're like, we should have this in our clinic, because people get it now. People understand more about the health aspect of looking good.
Yes.
Which to me is great. I mean, like I say, I was never so much into the whole cosmetic thing, but if it's an in for people to understand that they need to age well from a physical point of view, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all come in through a different door.
Yeah.
Different doors of healing. And wanting to look a little younger than we are is that's totally legitimate door. If you follow it all the way through.
Yeah.
Sarah, is there anything else that you want to add, or any last thoughts that you have to share? This has been just such a fun conversation.
Yeah, no, I think we did a lot, Meredith.
We covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And also thanks again for what you do and for creating this product. And we'll have a link to it in the show notes.
Thank you, Meredith.
And thanks for mustering up the energy and courage to start a business and make this all happen.
Yes. Yes. Fingers crossed that all goes well. It's been a bumpy ride, but yeah, I think I'm on the homeward straight. So thank you.
Woohoo. This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.